Searching. I think I got it. Oh. Could someone run and let that guy in? Okay. Looks like we're up. Awesome. Yeah, and I see myself. I'm just gonna check and see. Oof. Oh no. Okay, we got one person watching. I'll try it myself with wires. Okay, we got two people watching, and I just installed all the stuff like 10 minutes ago to do the streaming, so, and it looks like it's working. I'm gonna check it out. Yep, it is working. Okay, cool. Now, let me switch over to my presenter. I just finished these slides. Hey everybody. Hi. Hello. How's it going? So thanks for coming. Really excited to talk about React and do kind of try to, I guess, start sort of what might possibly be a series. Today I think we're going to talk more about kind of React from the ground up, I guess. So sort of the history and what makes it special, what are kind of the key components that that it's sort of built around, and like why does it exist, why is it so popular, some of that. But the majority of the talk is going to be more about what we'll get to in a minute, something called the virtual DOM, and how React is able to use that. I will be switching between my slides and another person's slides, who he graciously let me use. His have a lot more code samples and stuff, and mine are kind of more just kind of informational. So if at any point something goes over your head, or you think I explained something wrong, I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility. You know, it's pretty small, it's pretty conversational. This isn't a conference talk or anything, so yeah, just raise your hand or shout if you have a question. Most of the concepts, though, will be repeated, so maybe if it doesn't make sense the first time, maybe the second or third time. If it's something still unclear, yeah, please like stop me and I'll try to explain. Yeah, so with that, this is an intro to React. So me, that picture looks really weird, but on this screen. So I'm a self-taught developer, been coding for about 4 years. Prior to that, I didn't. do much of anything that was anything like a career, anything like that. Just kind of went to college for a long time before, without a whole lot to show for it. But now I discovered programming. Oh, got someone outside. Hang on 1 second, sorry. Does someone mind running and checking it might be that door or that door over there. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay. I'll try to stay around. I'll try to not shout, but I will try to project more. I know I'm like speaking over things, and that's unfortunate. So yeah, if I start, and I have a tendency to mumble, so if I start doing that again, just stop me. Yeah, I'm often tired. So there's this really cool thing that happens every year. That's kind of a survey of a bunch of developers, tens of thousands of people participate in it. It's called stateofjs.com. It's interesting that, hey Patrick, it's kind of interesting to go look at this and see the rise of React and kind of humble beginnings to now kind of market domination that it has right now, even including a lot of other frameworks kind of taking its ideas and re-implementing it. It's really interesting. So you can go back and look at the different surveys, or if you want, it's still open for a few more days. So if you are a developer, or are just getting into it even, if you want to take that survey, it's really cool. I tried to look up some like graphs on React's popularity, but there were like so many of them, and they were all different. I think this probably has the best kind of analytics on that sort of thing. This a lot of this presentation is going to reference, and even we're going to jump into this other slide deck a bit. It's a really great presentation from Benji Gillum. He's a developer out of the UK. He's on Twitter. You can follow him. He also he makes. I just kind of want to like give him some props. He makes a really cool tool called PostGraphile, which if you're trying to use GraphQL and Postgres, this is like a match made in heaven. Basically, you don't have to write any GraphQL backend at all. It just reads your database and gives you an API that you can query like it's SQL, but with GraphQL. It's amazing. Yeah. I'll have a link at the end. They're also just on my GitHub. I just pushed them. So kind of get a feel. Oh, I should probably turn that off. It's people asking me if this is recorded. Yeah. Who here is a developer or getting into develop? Like who is just starting out? Maybe like less than 1 year experience, 2 years, 3 years, 2-3 years. Let's say 4, more than 4. Okay, cool. So we have some new people and then some more experienced people. So this should be pretty. This is pretty fundamental. We're not doing like React's like async profile, like optimization stuff. All that stuff exists, and like I do want to talk about those things later. But today is very like intro to React, so it should be pretty thorough though, and there will be a lot of content. So if there's if anything doesn't make sense, just raise your hand or wait because it's gonna come around again. Sorry for the train. And who has heard of React? I mean, you came to this, so I assume everyone. Okay. So we all know about the DOM, right? The document object model. It has its detractors. DOM is a mess. Another one browser is the worst API ever. This is Douglas Crockford, so these things. It's is made up of some basic components, and these are true everywhere. If you're building something that's running in a browser, these are the technologies that you're using. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's only those, but it's all three of those. And then the various APIs that you use to interact with it. There are a lot of ways to change the DOM manually. So jQuery is kind of it was invented for making those things easier, but at the same time, anyone who's used a lot of jQuery probably knows that as soon as you start to build anything like remotely complicated or with a lot of parts, it becomes pretty unmanageable. And then we also have other solutions. I'm trying to kind of place this around the time that React started. So when React, what it was reacting to as far as the kind of the environment. So that was Angular 1 was really popular. Several other Knockout, several MVC frameworks, model view controller, just Ember, those kind of things were all kind of around. They were all very bulky and opinionated, and you had to write a lot of boilerplate if you wanted to do anything. You had to kind of make your entire app that. And it presented a lot of issues when it came to performance and trying to make incremental changes. So React was kind of trying to figure out how to do something better than what its predecessors were doing. A lot of them were using like templates, or had kind of template view sort of based apps. And one of the things that happens when you have that is you don't get a lot of reuse. You kind of just make these one-off templates. They do one thing. They have their code. It's just a lot. So where does React fit? There's this great blog post that you might want to check out about why is React more popular. And the author of it says that React is only a UI library. It doesn't prescribe routing, state management, data fetching, or even language choice. So all React is trying to do, it's a lot, but it's trying to say, we want to control how things get drawn on the screen, basically, in a nutshell. So it's more of a library than a framework. Framework being something like Angular, Ember, but people still say React framework. That's fine. I say that. It was introduced in 2013 in this kind of famous talk by Pete Hunt, who there's actually like a really exciting time for web development, a lot of innovation all happening at once. But they kind of looked at the landscape of what was going on, were dissatisfied, and trying to figure out kind of a better way. If you watch that talk, two things that he mentions are coupling. This occurs a lot in, well, these are actually the definitions from Wikipedia for these things. So how much are your different components reliant on one another, meaning if you make a change somewhere, will that break something else? And yeah, just that. And then cohesion is kind of this idea about like separation of concerns. Yeah, I don't want to. I kind of want to skip this. Just watch the talk; it's really good. So in 2013, one of the really popular frameworks was called Backbone, and this is also emblematic of some other kind of like popular techniques of the day. But Backbone definitely it made things a lot easier, but you ended up you got kind of these component-like things. So sorry, I just realized my screen's messed up. You have a lot of extra code. You have a lot of manual manipulation of the DOM that's going on. So you'll notice in here there's like this this.element.html. So we're setting the HTML directly by calling this template, which is a function that uses underscores template function that generates HTML from strings, and then our events are this object that just listens for anytime you click a p tag, and then render is a string form of the function here that's being called. It's just like this kind of spaghetti, and it's all in one place, and you don't get a lot of reuse, and it's kind of difficult to read and difficult to reason about. Yeah, there were problems. So anytime you wanted to update the DOM, you had to do it manually. You had to often tell it how to update the DOM, it meaning the browser or the render function. You ended up coding things more than once. That coupling made it really unclear of what the kind of dependency structure of your DOM is, and it makes it more difficult to reason about and difficult to test, because there's no way to test what something is supposed to look like without actually running all those functions and seeing and like checking the output and things like that. And then this was from another slide deck. Basically says the same thing. As far as development, the tools were nowhere near where they are today. You have to, if something goes wrong, you get into some kind of unpredictable state, you just kind of have to blow all your state away and like start over. So you're just hitting refresh all the time. That goes for development at the same time. If you make a change, you have to kind of manually refresh, and then you might get into this weird state where you made a change but you forgot to refresh, so the thing isn't doing what you wanted. React kind of is trying to solve those things. So really quick, we're going to kind of review some JavaScript, some modern JavaScript. You'll probably hear the term ES6 quite a bit. That stands for ECMAScript 6. Basically, the thing to know is that it's a new version of JavaScript that came out in 2015, and prior to that, it had been 9 years before a new version of JavaScript had been released. There had been a lot of kind of starts and stops, and some development, but there hadn't been a new major version. And now we're on this yearly cycle where 2015 was followed by ES 2016, and then ES 7, but you're not supposed to say 7, but everyone says it, and now we're on ES 2018, so it's kind of messy, but at the end I'll kind of show you like the tools that we use to resolve those things. But basically the language is improving, they're adding a little bit, it's very stable, so the things that they add every year is pretty small. They might just kind of add like a couple new functions or like one new operator. But these tools, Babel and Webpack, kind of let you write even in the most experimental code that you want to use that looks just like C# if you wanted to. And it will just compile it to older versions of JavaScript that can run anywhere. Here's some of the syntax. So ES6 introduced let and const variable declaration. So instead of var, which kind of had unpredictable behavior, when you say like var var a equals 1 or something. If you had that pretty far down your file, JavaScript would hoist it to the top of the file using this thing called variable hoisting. It also did it to functions. The important thing, as well as there's a few places where its behavior would be kind of undefined. Like you would say var I equals 1, like inside of a for loop, but that I wouldn't be the I that you expect it to be. It would be this global I. So let and const solve this by creating new variables inside of loops, and by doing some kind of fancy stuff where well, it's nice that they actually give you two, because there's two different kind of use cases, but they ensure that behavior is more predictable, basically. And you want to use let whenever you have a variable that might change over time, and when you use const for constant, that's when something shouldn't change. We also got class. It's not a class like a Java class or other types of classes that you might be used to. It's really just a JavaScript object with a constructor function, and it kind of papers over the inheritance model of JavaScript to make it look like class, and in fact it behaves basically the same way. But you don't have to write all the prototype chaining sort of things. And the other difference between an object is you don't have the comma between methods. This that the JavaScript, the much loved this keyword in JavaScript. Some people have in fact done away with this entirely, which is weird to say. But this kind of the value of this depends on how it's called. And then we also got this arrow function syntax, which is equivalent to this expression. And we'll see more of this later, but it's just it's called a lambda, or an anonymous function. It just means take my operands on this side of the arrow and have some function. But I shouldn't have circled that. I should give an example, but we'll see more of this in a second. Are there any questions so far? Okay, I'm just steamrolling. There's some other things like private methods and public methods, but and those might come up next time because they do sometimes get used in React. But in general, you don't have to worry about them. In fact, you don't have to use classes at all if you don't want to. A few other things. We have import and export syntax now, so it does use common.js under the hood, and that's just a way of basically sharing codes between different modules. We tend to think of modules as files. They're really just kind of a way of just having a bunch of small files that have one component, but I can share things between them using this import-export syntax. The last thing was this ... operator, which does a few different things depending on how you use it. It's called rest or spread, and we'll see it in one of these examples. But its main function is to make your code much more terse and expressive. So instead of a lot of creating a new object and copying all the methods into that object, you can just use ... object, and it does that for you. It's really great. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. So React uses these new language features to give us a new API for creating components from web. This is an example. We're not going to go into it, but this is kind of what it looks like. Remember that backbone example that was just the object with the keys, and they were calling each other by referencing a string name. Classes method's a lot more explicit. So you just have a name and then a body, and then a name and a body, etc. Like that. So this is the actual component there in that that you saw the code for here. So this hello world, and then a paragraph that does something when I right-click it, and then this reference to this local state, and then a text area component, or an element, I should say. And that's what this is that text area. This is that random number, so I can click on this and I get a new random number, and there's that hello world. So this is actually rendered into my slides from that code. It's the exact same code. You can render anywhere. React just needs to know what element you want to use as your root. So here what's going on is we're going and getting that element just by the ID, and then rendering a component into that element. And then from there, React kind of builds its whole structure. Here's a counterexample. So we have this, we'll go more into state, so I'm going to kind of gloss over it, but React is trying it's doing it in a really smart way, but it's not letting you set your own state anywhere. And at the same time, it's not letting you change just a DOM element. So like the same way that you can like call an attribute in jQuery, like that first example, and then set its HTML. We don't get that in React. We have to instead create these functions that do the state updating. And then from that, React is able to do all this optimization and keep things like very kind of clean and pure in like a functional sense. Yeah, and this code here is this actual component. Have a button that whenever you click it, calls this function, which sets the state. The count property of the state, it just increments it by 1. And it works. So that's some React. There's a few kind of key differences between regular DOM elements and React, and it has to do with the naming of JavaScript. Since you're in JavaScript land instead of HTML land, you can't use like the word for like you would in an HTML element, because for means something very special in JavaScript. So instead we have HTML for, and by that same token, you can't use the word class, because like we went over, class means something very different in JavaScript, so we have class name. But they function in it's really just a mapping. It's effectively an alias. And same goes for onClick and several, and actually all event listeners that you would want to call all follow this convention. Yeah. On mouse enter, on mouse leave, all those things. So some of the kind of core concepts of React are this. Should have showed the picture first probably, but whereas Angular had what was called two-way data binding, so you had a store that had your state, and then that fed into the view, and the view could change it kind of in place, and then the store would have to, it was called scope basically, and like scope was shared between controllers and views. React wants to change that and just make everything a one-way tree basically, where data flows down the tree and then events bubble back up. And it actually, you get a lot of performance wins from taking this model, because you can do smart things when when React has to figure out what things to actually re-render when. The other thing is it should be predictable. These are just kind of like the React principles. It's like, this is kind of what they want you to do. But it makes a lot of sense. This is kind of how they built the library. Don't mutate in place. It's always faster to just re-render something because it's using this virtual DOM, which we'll go over more. And here's kind of a diagram of that data flow. So you have this kind of tree of components, and the data's flowing down, and then it's coming back up, and then that's would then trigger any change in the data may trigger a re-rendering of one of these components. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say. Some other here. This is kind of what the rest of the talk is going to be about. We're going to talk about JSS, JSX, props, state, set state, lifecycle hooks a little bit, and then classes and functional components. And we're going to go over these kind of quickly, but if anything like jumps out at you or doesn't make sense, we can go over it some more. So JSX, you probably noticed this kind of funny, or yeah, I'll say this kind of funny looking thing where there's this HTML, but it's inside of JavaScript. This is all in fact JavaScript with this special. What this is a, it's kind of like a macro, but it's a special syntax that effectively does the exact same thing. So these are equivalent things. If we had, in fact, I think I'm gonna skip the rest of this slide because I have some better ones. But the important parts are that it's kind of this like HTML, XML like data structure. It's not. It's kind of a data structure, I guess, but it really turns into a function. And it kind of co-locates your view logic with your component logic. So kind of that separation of concerns. One of the things that the developers of React thought was that we were in fact separating the wrong things, and that view logic and state and events and all this stuff is all really talking about the same stuff. We're all talking about these elements, so it's actually better to put it all in one place rather than having like a template in one file that just takes some data and then having a controller and then a model that lives somewhere else. And if you follow good architecture practices, this is great. It can kind of get messy if you just try to like cram everything into the same component. I do that a lot, but React makes it really easy to abstract all those things and make these small little reusable things that are like this. Like I just want to render a link. You know. Okay, now we're going to switch over to this other talk. Is there any questions or anything so far? Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay, I'm clicking on it. I can preview it. Okay, one second. Look, it opened it like 4 times. I don't know why it wouldn't Anyway. Okay. So we got this function called view, and this is in fact very similar to the render function in React, but this is effectively the API of a component. A component is just a function that takes props and state. It has a lot of benefits. We can compare a component in this way. We can also compose components together. So the body of this component could in fact return another function that accepts props and state. So we get these kind of composed components like this. Have you ever seen a function that returns a function? That kind of pattern. That's what's going on. And these slides are also available if you need this. Like some of this is pretty a little bit higher level. Yeah, and then we can also test bugs very easily. So we have this function called DOM, and it takes a tag, which is going to tell it what type of HTML elements you create, attributes, which is going to be an object of any kind of HTML attributes that you want to set, and then children, and then we're also using this splat operator here. So it's just going to take our spread. It's actually called rest when it's in this position, but people kind of use the word splat, the ... It's just going to collect any other arguments that you want to pass to it and put it in this array called children. So, and what it returns is a string with a bracket with a tag, so that's going to be your HTML element, and then it calls this HTML attributes function. I couldn't figure out what this was at first, but then I went and just wrote it, and it was pretty easy. You can do it in like one line. You just take an object and turn it into a string, where it takes keys and values and turns it into key equals value in a string thing, just like an HTML attribute. And then it just calls join on the children and then close the tag. Right? So it's just saying it's using that rest parameter. And here's what we get out. So if we call DOM with span and then null for the attributes and hello as the children, then it's going to create this span element with hello as the inner HTML, and then a closing tag. Same here if we call DOM with a, and then this attribute object of href equals /foo, and then several children. It can have any numbers. Since we're using this spread here, it's just gonna collect everything and put it in this object. It's gonna create this. We'll have this output of an ATAT with a href foo and then foo bar backs. Terrible names. So if we have another function that we can call username, which takes one argument of an object with a user key inside of it. So this is called destructuring here. This is when inside of your argument list, if you put curly braces around it, it's telling the JavaScript environment to basically go ahead and create a local variable called user, and then set that to the value of whatever the user key is in that object that you pass. So it's kind of like a shorthand. It's really nice. It's another thing that just makes your code shorter. And then that returns the function DOM that calls span with empty attributes, and then the user, it gets the .name property off of it. So here, using it, if we have we can use username function and then pass it that object of user, that has another object named Benji, what we'll get out is this span of with the child Benji. And the thing that we want to focus on here is that like this is what React is actually doing when we create these components. This won't be how we create components. We're going to use JSX, but if at any time you ever need to or wanted to, you could just make your own virtual DOM, kind of using these kind of like this type of DOM. This is a virtual DOM, effectively. Then we can have another function, login page, that just calls DOM with h1, and then it's interesting here as a child, it has another function. It's actually calling username as one of its child. So it's going to have a nested, an h1. So whenever I evoke it here, I'm gonna have this h1 with a span inside of it. So that's how you get this like nest. That's why it's like virtual DOM. It's this nested DOM elements, and you can call these functions recursively. Keep track of who's called who, and then once you've done that, you're like halfway to React, basically. Then another one, log out, and just creates another link. We can also use ternary operators like this. So we can conditionally render elements and items. So this one will check if this props.user, if that property exists, then render the logged in page. Otherwise, render logged out. So that's when you're starting to do like rendering different elements depending on state, basically. Yeah, and right now that's just remaining as HTML. If we want to make this a real virtual DOM, here's what we have to do. So instead of this DOM that returns an object with a component tag and a props, we take a component. And that can be a string, it can be null. It just has to represent one of those nodes, the result of calling DOM on something. It could also be another function. So now that was our original DOM function. Now we have this DOM function that takes a component, attributes, and then children, and then returns an object of a component with set to the component that you pass to it, which again can be any of those function or function component null, and then it has props. And you can't see that, but that says objects. So that's object.assign. You could actually do you could use ... here again instead of doing object.assign, but what that's going to do is copy attributes into this object that has children set to children. So you have just one object that'll end up with the keys children, and then whatever else is on attributes. It just does like basically merges. It's a thing in JavaScript called assign, but it's in other languages it's called merge. Yeah, and then so we can start using it here. And again, let's see. Yeah, we've got this. This is the exact same as before, but what we're getting back will be a little bit different. So we have this login page. The only difference here is that we're calling DOM and then passing username as that first argument, and then the props, and then the only child will be that exclamation point. So, and then a logout page. It's just going to be a link to say, please log in, and then that conditional page element. And when we call page, which checks the user status again, and then renders the logged in page or the logged out page depending on if there's a user. we're going to get this structure. And what's cool is, sorry that this isn't showing up on the screen. This is called a shallow render. So JavaScript will actually only evaluate it up to this point when you call page. It won't like give an error here because you're not evoking this components function. It's just going to say like, oh, components, that's a function. You can call it at some point if you need to. It's sort of like a method almost. It's just sitting there and it's waiting for whatever that function does. And then it has this props key, which is an object with children, and then it has a user. And typically in these components, your props they'll usually have more than one thing, so it'll just be this object. And so it's really easy to introspect, and it's easy to pass those props onto other components as well. And it's one of the things that makes a virtual DOM awesome. And the cool thing is we can actually test these components now in isolation. We have a page component which is made up of those other components, but those other components aren't dependent on page. So we don't have that tight coupling anymore. And then later on we might talk about pure components. That's going to tells React to do even less work, basically. Yeah, so then if we call a logged in page with the props, then we'll get this back. So yeah, this is the beginning. This is effectively the virtual DOM. So virtual DOM is really just a data structure, and it's JavaScript. So it's a JavaScript object, and it's it really only has two things: the component and props. And then those props, one of them can be children, and those children can themselves be a component, and then you're back where you started. If we were to perform a deep render, then we would actually, like here, this function would actually expand that all the way out. So see how here component is just a function, and here it's actually the result of calling it with props. And from doing the deep render, we get the virtual DOM, which is just going to become this HTML. Seems like a lot of work, maybe, but I promise there are benefits to this. So one example, actually, you need to keep track of. I don't want to go all the way through these slides, but yeah, you can imagine changing one of the parameters. You don't need to go and change a view or anything like that. You just call the function with a different value. And we get these different children. And now here's this is the thing. Instead of naively re-rendering everything, React performs a diff. Does everyone know what a diff is? Or heard that term? Yeah. So a diff is just anytime you want to examine two data structures. Those data structures could be files, they can be anything. But the diff is just what exists in this one, what exists in this one. It's effectively the is it transclusion? It's what's different between the two of them. So it's like if I'm holding up 3 fingers and then these 2 fingers, the diff between these 2 hands is this finger. because this doesn't exist on this end, right? So I don't know.
Basically figures out what it needs, the minimum it needs to change.
Right.
Everything that the page is the same, except for a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So instead of calling all those render functions for everything, it's only going to call render for that one component where it detected a difference, and diff means difference. It's the difference between it. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Because in that backbone example that we looked at, it was actually re-rendering the entire page every time. There's some ways that you can improve on that, but this with virtual DOM, it makes doing those kind of things trivial, basically. And then it also does it without reading the browser DOM. So the virtual DOM is in fact a copy, if you want to think of it like that, of what the DOM will be. It's like the next state of the DOM. So it doesn't need to look at the DOM itself. It's keeping all of that. It has all that data. And it's probably going to use this word soon, so I'll save it. But yeah, so you don't have to do this like read, write, read. Okay, like I'll do a read and then I'll figure something out, like, okay, and that's going to tell me the next thing to render. And then from that, like, you can just kind of get caught in these circles. That can make it really difficult to predict when you're re-rendering. I've got to work on that word. When that happens, So, and this process is called reconciliation. So this is what React does to do that. Read the virtual DOM, do a diff, figure out what things need to be updated, call those updates, and then it also does some things to like call them in the appropriate order and make sure that everything only gets rendered one time. It's really cool, and those are kind of like advanced topics that we'll talk about later, like in a month or something. If you read this part of their documentation, they'll talk about how they went from in-cubed to linear time. They'll talk about like the algorithm that they came up with for doing that. It's quite cool. It has to do with like saving keys for all your elements, basically. So it just kind of like flattens out the entire structure. And I think that's as much as I want to talk about here. So there's these other things. If you like, it split React and React DOM into two different libraries, but basically React DOM is the library that does all that stuff, and then React itself is just kind of the component building part of it. So you'll always use both of them together. In addition to that, there's a React Native, which allows you to write React components that, in the same way that the virtual DOM can figure out what to render in a browser, the virtual DOM can figure out what to render in an iOS or an Android app. So, that's still being worked on, but it's about to undergo a major rewrite, and Airbnb uses React Native, for example. It's kind of neat because the idea is like you can reuse components from web and native, and not only that, but for both or as many native platforms as you want to try to target. There's even like a file system. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my original slides. Let's see. Okay. I'm gonna take a little bit of water. Does anyone have any questions on virtual DOM? I should probably check. I'm just gonna check that. Oh, cool. Okay. There are people watching. They haven't said anything. Okay. Go back. Oh no. There we go. Okay. So yeah, the main thing makes a copy of the DOM, only changes where necessary, uses reconciliation, and it's just a data structure. Oops, actually, go back here. Okay. Now we're going to talk about props and state. Does anyone know what props are in the context of React? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, they're just properties. Yeah, it's usually, and it's an object. It's a named thing because it's an object, so it has a key and then a value. That's it. It's just the object that gets passed. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they can be optional, or they can be required. So you might not choose not to render something if a property isn't provided. Yeah. So, and it's how we get external data into our components. So, this is some JSX. So, remember that DOM function? I actually. Is this syntax? Can you look at this and then think about the virtual DOM? And I wonder if I should just like show what this transpiles into, just to like the because this is a JSX syntax. I'm gonna do that real fast before we do this. I just wanted to kind of like really click that like this is just a function, even though it looks like HTML. And in fact, if you're using one of these, it's that opening brace. So this is the component name, and then this is one of the props. Let me go ahead and do this real quick. Right, so this is what it's going to call, and then it's going to gather up these things to pass in as props whenever it calls that component. Yeah. I'm just going to go ahead and just show kind of the output. So what it's actually going to do is call, and I just copied this from that slide. So it's going to call react.createElement, which is just like that DOM function that we looked at earlier. And it's going to pass it the component name, that user card, and then this object that starts right here that has a user, and then a size, and user is another object. And that's it. I mean, this turns into that, basically. I just felt like we didn't maybe quite hit that home. But we don't have to write it like that. We can just use this shorthand syntax, and it makes it really, really nice, because if you have a render function that has these components inside of it, if you want to move something around, like position of things, it's very declarative in that way. So you can just change things, and usually you're using something like create React app, and it's watching your files whenever they change and just re-rendering immediately for you, and it's just this really great developer experience. Right. Yeah.
That will say where you want this, how you want these.
Yeah.
This object that will use it together.
Right. Right. Yeah. This will just be just like here. It'll probably be like if I wanted to define one real fast. I could just write like
about that.
So we can just grab the like offset user.name, put it inside of the div. And what I do this probably needs. Oh, it's because it isn't like this, just on its own. I think I probably. So because it noticed that there's another component nearby, it didn't like that one component just being on its own. But I can wrap it in parentheses here, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to turn this JSS into JavaScript. So now I have this user card, right? This component, this is a component that I just made. It just takes props, and then it just grabs props.user.name and displays it. And yeah, and then all that does is calls react.createElement. It's creating a div because I specified a div right here. And then, oh yeah. Whoops. Yeah. Oh, can't move that. Yeah, so whenever react.createElement here, it's taking as its first argument this function call. So it's going to call this with these props. And then that'll be the resulting output. And then if it gets rendered somewhere, like I'll tell it how to render it. Okay, let's go back. So, this is getting some external data, right? This is a URL with an image. And what we're doing here is, again, like calling the user card component, passing it a user prop, and then and a size prop. Oh, so here's the example. So here we're destructuring the prop to pull out user and size, and then just returning a div, passing a user card, and then calling this avatar component, which is probably like an image tag or something. Right, exactly. So these are in fact nested React components. This says div here, but that's calling react.createElement div. And then it's passing these in as children and calling react.createElement with those things, with the component as the name. And yeah, it's all the way down. So you can really, if you wanted to, you could write it either way. You don't have to use JSX. It's just, and some people don't like it. Like some people definitely kind of scoff at having what looks like HTML inside of your JavaScript. And I understand that. But personally, I find it so much easier to reason about what's going on when I just kind of have everything all in one place. Yeah. I really enjoy it. Okay, and so that's props. They're just arguments that are an object. The other kind of key thing is state. Benji here is telling us some kind of best practices. It's really, they've done so much optimization, I think, since these slides were originally made, that you don't get the kind of bottlenecks that used to happen when all of your components had their own state. And might be passing that state back up to a parent component. Now it's really just as fast. There's a little bit more code when you write like class that has a bunch of methods in it versus just a function that renders some JSX. But in general, like I still kind of like to follow this. I just try to kind of.
And then if you can, as much as you can, make those components easy to test.
Right.
Because they're always going to produce same input.
Yep.
Going to produce the same output.
Yeah, and that's all they do. Yeah. They're kind of they're sometimes called dumb components, just meaning that they don't have their own internal state. I don't really like that word. I think like functional components are usually how they're used. So they're just functions that take props that render something. But there's that kind of joke. It's like, okay, that's all great, but like my app exists in the world, and the world has state, and I need to account for that state and do some kind of business logic depending on what that state is, or I need to update that state. React gives you a way of doing that that is really simple but really powerful at the same time, and it's kind of tied into how that deep rendering of the virtual DOM gets done.
You said that state is improved over time. There's
Yeah.
a bunch of plurals on it.
Yeah.
And they all use state.
They don't?
Plurals that
Oh.
I have watched all of them.
Yeah, it's definitely. There are various state management libraries out there that all kind of tie into React, but internally, like the state that's built into the component has gotten so good that most of the people don't use those anymore and just use the internal state. It really is. It just takes care of a lot of things for you. But yeah, that's maybe that would be a good thing to talk more about next time. To think about how you like application state versus component state. But I don't want this to be like 5 hours. Yeah, so you can think of state, it's just data that exists on that component. And it's stored inside of a object called state. You reference it from the functions inside of that component using this.state. And since it's just an object, you access those values via their keys. When you change this.state, the only way that you can do it, and this is kind of like a beginner foible sometimes, you'll try to like, instead of calling this.state, you'll do like, just inside of a function, you'll have this.state.firstname equals my name. And then nothing happens, and you're like, what? Why didn't my thing re-render? It's because you didn't actually change that state. You didn't tell React that that's what you were trying to do. So it didn't re-render. What you want to do is use the method that's on every React component class. So every smart component, if you want to use that, it has a method called this.setState. And setState, when you call it, that's what triggers that re-rendering to happen. And that's actually when like that diffing that we talked about, that's when that's going to happen. So it's going to say, did my state change? Oh, it did. Okay, I need to re-render. It didn't. Okay, I don't have to do anything. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's well, if you can change it like inside of a function, but then you still need to give back a new array for it to set that new state too. Yeah. I think that earlier example, we can go back and look at it. It uses this.setState, but it's really all it is a function that you call with an object that represents some part of your new state.
That's spread out.
Right. Yeah, so that whole idea, that kind of comes back to this, I guess we didn't really talk about it yet, but this idea of immutability, and um, a lot of React's virtual DOM reconciliation is dependent on that, and that state only happening where it knows about it, and not mutating these data structures directly. Yeah, and a lot of other libraries have now taken this and kind of use very similar approaches. Yeah, a lot of different languages. And I don't know if we're gonna go into events. Let me go back. Yeah, I was just gonna kind of summarize these two different types. So we just talked about kind of functional components and classes, for lack of a better word. Within, since you can just use what looks like normal HTML elements inside of your JSX, keep in mind it actually is calling that React.createElement and creating a React element out of it. React has gone ahead and implemented some of those to act just like normal HTML elements. So like a text input, when you just want to render a text input, you can use it and enter some new values, and it updates what's inside of the values of that field, and it works just like you'd expect it to. You can reference it using like form, all those same kind of like patterns. At the same time, there's this, and those are called uncontrolled. So that means like they're keeping track of their own state internally, and you're not doing anything. There's also this idea of controlled components, which means that you're keeping track of the state of that component. So it's like a text field where you're keeping track of like, what's the value right now? Okay, I got a new key press. What is that? And was it a backspace? Well, then I need to remove the last element. Is it another character? Well, then I need to add that on. It's actually fairly straightforward. If you go to React and do their little like try React in 15-minute tutorials, I think that's one of the things that you do. But those are two things to keep in mind, because sometimes you'll use a component in a way that you expected, and then get a warning in your console that says like you're using a you're treating an uncontrolled component as if it's controlled, so you need to go ahead and make it a fully controlled component at that point. Happens. Oh, okay. I guess we're going to talk about this. I think this one's pretty brief. This is about how React handles events. And just like we talked about that unidirectional data flow, we have events actually kind of bubble up, and they're all events are global in React. So if you click on an element, you need to know the name of the element that you're clicking on, basically. So then React can then go and call whatever listeners were waiting for that event to happen. So here's a kind of quick code example. I can't make it any bigger. Where we have a to-do item component that takes text, and then this is what's called an on-click handler. So this is a function that's going to get called. You know, because it starts with on, so it's on trash click. And then I have this div component with a class name, and then an on-click handler that will call that function. And then this to-do list component, which takes as props item and on-delete item. And what it's going to do is map over those items, pluck out the text and ID. This key, this is an important bit. Anytime you map over an array, you need to tell React, you need to provide a key for that item. Otherwise, React won't know what element it actually is. and you're providing this text. So again, this map function is just calling to do this component with every item in the items array. And then it's giving it this onClick event with the onDelete item. So you can imagine like this is basically a to-do list app that I guess, I guess this is like a trash icon. So this is like a to-do list, and imagine it has a trash icon, and you're clicking that, and you want to remove it. Yeah, right. Yep. So yeah, the important things were these onClicks. And then we had onTrashClick. So that's just a prop that we're passing to the to-do item that will be the value of the onClick handler for that div. So we're passing a function from a parent component to a child component, and then that function will get called whenever that click event happens. And here we can kind of see it all in action. If this was a to-do app, we could have some state here that's has, let's say, an array of items that are the original items. And then this handle delete, what this is doing is getting an ID and then calling set state and setting the new state, the items in that state, to the value of filtering the items array wherever where is that correct? Yeah, for
So the ID is not equal to that.
right. Then keep it. Otherwise, right. Yeah, and since we're calling, since we're providing a new array to items, this is in fact immutable, even though filter. Well, I think filter actually is immutable anyway because it's going to return a new array. Yeah. Yep. And any questions about that? Oh. Okay. Then we have these controlled components, which just have their own state. Let's see, what does this one do? Yeah, so this is like what I was talking about. This is that controlled input. So it's getting its value from the state here. This next item text. And then whenever the key press happens, it's waiting to hear if it's an enter. If it's that, then go ahead and update state. Yeah, that's controlled. And then there is a section here on immutability. And the thing about in a language like JavaScript, which is dynamic and everything is kind of mutable by default, to get immutability, you just kind of have to know what are the functions that are immutable by nature. Immutable meaning that they are going to return a new data structure rather than mutating that. Mutating being the opposite of not mutating. Yeah. Yeah, you don't see array.slice or splice. Yeah. And with objects, you don't see stuff where you're like deleting keys usually, or setting keys to other values directly. Like you're typically just calling that set state, keeping all your state in one place, rendering that state in your render function. And there's a few other kind of tricky, or not tricky things, they're just like techniques that it's good to know for keeping things immutable. There's other libraries that you can use if you want to go full immutable. Immutable.js being one of them. And I think if you use those, you actually do get some performance speedups because it can kind of like opt into this immutable way of handling stuff. But I haven't used that, so I can't comment too much on it. So we have this idea of a pure component that only uses immutable data, and then it's not going to change that data in any way. By only using immutable data, we can very quickly check which props have changed. That's kind of key. If none has changed, then we can bypass rendering and reuse the last virtual DOM. So it's like just keep that copy and don't do anything. And that can happen for every component. So one kind of pro tip is you don't want to have a lot of deeply nested components because, or if so, don't have whatever that container is have too much state associated with it, because anytime that top level state changes, it could trigger. It's going to have to go ahead and check all the children and see if they were dependent on that same state. But that's like later. What is that? Oh, this is kind of like how the rendering works. Okay, that's all. I think we're about done. Talk about control components. Last thing, the other kind of like groundbreaking thing that I guess I don't want to call it that. I think React. This isn't like in the docs, but I think it was very influenced by game development because it kind of has this like state render, this like model view update cycle, which you see a lot in game development or anytime you're trying to just draw something to a string to a screen. And as part of that cycle happening, you can actually kind of tell it where in the cycle you want something to happen. And it does that in the same way those classes have a this.state method. They'll also have a this.lifecycle hook thing. So it can make it really nice if you want to tell it like, say you have a component whose state updates but you don't want it to re-render. You can specify that in a should component update lifecycle hook. And I think I have a picture. Oh, actually, I think the reason I put we're going to Google some diagrams is because we're going to Google some diagrams. And there's a lot. Yeah, so we have there are these phases that it goes through: mounting, updating, unmounting, and these are the actual. There's not this many lifecycle hooks anymore. They took out like 5 of them, and there's really only like 3 now. But if you're using up to, I think, React 16.3, you still have access to all of these, and now some of them are prefixed with unsafe. Because what they found was basically people were misusing a lot of these lifecycle hooks, and like inside of them updating state, which was causing a lot of extra re-rendering to happen. So it's a little bit different, but the main takeaway is just that there are these phases that occur during the reconciliation and rendering. And if you want to, you can hook into those phases for different logic. And I just Googled React lifecycle. And in fact, there's a couple of really good cheat sheets that'll come up here. I linked to some of them in the end, but they kind of cover all this stuff in a more kind of digestible way. Okay, I'm just going to finish up real quick. Yeah, I think one of the really cool things about React is that you don't have to use it all at once. You don't have to rewrite your entire application in React. You can just implement like a small part of it. Say you have like a checkout is a kind of classic example where you have some kind of form that you want to do in React. You can just load that in to your existing application, your existing website. It doesn't need a server. It doesn't even need to render anything necessarily. You could just have it doing some kind of, like I saw someone who was using it for like a musical thing, like a tone emitter, and they were making these components that didn't render anything. They just like gave you a really nice API for like creating sounds. So React in that way is very kind of unopinionated, except for a couple things, mostly related to state. And yeah, it's just kind of it's good, especially for like some people that are maybe wanting to get into these newer development frameworks. I think like kind of introducing them a little bit at a time is a really nice way, particularly at like your current jobs, to try to start using these things, and then you can kind of show the benefits of them, get more adoption. Usually. Yeah, there's some just like amazing tooling out there, tens of thousands of packages that you can just go and use. These are really great UI frameworks. This one's actually from a company out of Dallas. I know these people, and they make a really great product. Material UI, so it's make your entire app to like Google Material specification, basically. And then Antidesign's another really popular one. Check out Create React App. It's amazing. It's like a command line tool. It gives you the entire environment. It's like zero configs, zero setup. It's great. Some of the stuff we didn't talk about. So like later, maybe. Yeah, we'll talk about these next time. And I'll have these slides up. Here's some more really good resources. And more reading. And thanks. Okay. I think that's it. Oh yeah, and if y'all are on Slack, Techno, we have a Slack group. It's pretty active. We have at least like a Node channel on functional programming, random, like we talk about this kind of stuff. If you want to get into it more and you have questions, like reach out to us. We have weekly, y'all probably know about the meetup page, so we have weekly and bi-weekly meetups there. A lot of times they're at bars, so we drink beers and we talk about programming. It's really fun. Yeah, I mean, if you have any workshop ideas, if you want to give a talk, let me know. If there's something you'd like to hear talk about, let me know. Yeah, that's all. Any questions, closing comments, or anything? Questions? Silence? Oh, you do like /join. And I think if you click channels at the top, it should bring up a modal that has all the available channels. Like where it says channels and then the ones that you're in. I think you can just click on channels. Oops. Okay.